So, good afternoon. So, I'm going to continue going through the 9 similes of emptiness that the Buddha spoke about in the Vajra Sutra. So, the next one is a drop of dew. So, I'll read what Kensur Jampa Tekchok says about that in his book, Insight into Emptiness. The simile of a dewdrop. If we look outside in the early morning, we see dewdrops on the tips of the blades of grass. Twinkling in the sunlight, they look so beautiful, but they are unstable. Once the sun rises and its warm light shines on the grass, the dewdrops dry up. This simile illustrates that conditioned things do not endure for long. They come into existence and perish in the same moment. So as he says, dewdrops are very transient, very ephemeral. They look really beautiful, like jewels, but they don't last long. So it would be crazy to get attached to them. If somebody got really excited about dewdrops and went out and started collecting them and putting them in jars and planned to keep them for a long time, we would think this person is nuts, wasting their time. But in the world, it's considered okay and even wise to collect real jewels, money, and other kinds of material things. So, of course, these things do last longer than dewdrops, and we do need a certain amount of them in order to just stay alive, to survive. But people usually accumulate more than they really need. And they usually do so with a sense of permanence. I'm going to be here forever. These things are going to be here forever. They're going to be mine forever. So that sense of permanence is just not realistic. It's just plain wrong. Because even these real jewels, money and so forth, are not permanent. And we are not permanent. Our bodies are not permanent. We're all subject to change and disintegration, just like dewdrops. So to carry on with Kensur Rinpoche's explanation, when we make something, let's say we construct a building or cook a meal, from the very moment it is made, it is constantly changing until eventually it falls apart and totally vanishes. The building falls down, the food is eaten. This is coarse impermanence. So they say there's 2 levels of impermanence. Coarse, which is visible, we can see it, and that's when something goes out of existence, like a building or a meal, which is going to happen here soon. But then there's also subtle impermanence, which is another level. So he says subtle impermanence is the arising and vanishing of things in each moment, never remaining for another instant. Due to their subtle impermanence, which we are usually oblivious to, one day they will totally disintegrate and fall apart, manifesting their coarse impermanence. So, so all of the things in the world are bodies and the bodies of others and all the material things, both in nature and also buildings and things that we create, we produce. All of these things are by nature impermanence, both types of impermanence. There's coarse impermanence. All of these things are going to go out of existence one day. But in the meantime, they're changing every minute, every second, every nanosecond, every tiny fraction. And it's because things are constantly changing and disintegrating, that's why eventually they completely fall apart and die or disappear. So this is the nature of all the things in samsara. Impermanent things change moment by moment without our having to do anything to cause that change. It is their nature not to remain in the next instant. So there's this statement in the Buddha's teachings that the very causes and conditions that give rise to something are also the causes and conditions for that thing to change and eventually disappear. And it's not, things don't need any other causes and conditions for them to change and disappear. And for a long time I was puzzled by that, because it does seem that there are external causes and conditions that bring about changes and eventually disappear, like the dewdrops. The sun shining on the dewdrops and the heat causes them to evaporate and disappear. But Buddhism says even if there were these other causes and conditions not there, even without these other causes and conditions, things would still disintegrate just from it's just their nature. The same causes and conditions giving rise to them are also the causes and conditions for them to change. So I used to think, why is that? And then what I came to, what really helped me, was just to think about how the causes and conditions that give rise to something are themselves impermanent. They have to be. If they were permanent, they wouldn't be able to give rise to any results. Like if a seed, for example, if a seed was permanent, that means it would never change. It would always be exactly the same. So how could it give rise to a sprout? And then tomatoes and peppers and cauliflowers and so on. It's impossible. So the causes and conditions that give rise to things themselves are impermanent. Themselves are subject to change moment by moment by moment. And so since they are impermanent, what they give rise to also has to be impermanent. It wouldn't be possible for them to be impermanent and then they give rise to something that's permanent, right? Because like always produces like. So for me, thinking in that way helped me understand, oh, okay, even the very causes and conditions that give rise to things, because they are impermanent, the things they produce, the things that are given rise to, produce things, condition things, they also have to be impermanent right from the first moment of their existence. They are changing all the time. That's their nature. So the Buddha taught that all conditioned things have this aspect, and they do not endure. Because they do not endure, they are not reliable or secure. For this reason, we should not count on the things and people of cyclic existence to remain the same. Okay, so we need to contemplate the impermanent nature of things to understand they're not reliable. They're not going to be there forever. They're not going to be able to provide us with everlasting happiness, which is what we're looking for. So we just can't get it from all these conditioned things in samsara. This takes a while to think about, but that's the point, is to detach our mind, to overcome our attachment to these things and our expectations of these things to bring us real happiness. And then on the other hand, there is real happiness, genuine long-term happiness that can be achieved by getting out of samsara, being free of samsara, which is the real purpose of the Buddha's teachings, to attain true cessations, the third noble truth, and a nirvana, the attainment of liberation from samsara. So these are permanent. They're said to be permanent, not impermanent. They don't change. So once we have achieved those, then he says once we attain those, we need not fear that they will dissolve and leave us bereft. So we compare the objects, the things of samsara, and then they are impermanent, transient, unable to give us long-term happiness. And then beyond samsara is nirvana, and the true cessation of all our suffering, our delusions, causes of suffering, and so on. So achieving those is the real purpose of the Buddha's teaching. So some people might find this kind of topic boring or irrelevant, considering all the problems that we have in the world right now, the pandemic and racism and violence, and also a lot of mental suffering. I just read the Washington Post reported recently that a third of Americans now show signs of clinical anxiety or depression. And these findings show a huge jump from before the pandemic and provide a real-time window into the country's collective mental health after 3 months of fear, isolation, soaring unemployment, and continuing uncertainty. So a lot of people are really suffering right now, both physically and mentally. And so you might think, well, this kind of topic doesn't really relate to these problems. But that's not true. My own experience is that contemplating impermanence really helps to calm down your mind and not get so anxious and upset and worried and frightened by problems, whether they're your own personal problems or problems in the world. And His Holiness last night, I heard him speak about this as well. He was talking more about dependent arising, but he said in his own experience, contemplating dependent arising, it really helps him to remain calm. And one aspect of dependent arising is dependence on causes and conditions. So if we contemplate how causes and conditions come together and give rise to phenomena, and then those phenomena are constantly changing and giving rise to further causes and conditions and so on and so forth. So there's just this continuous process of flux and flow because of so many causes and conditions. So it may not happen immediately, but contemplating this really does help to keep the mind more calm, more sane, even in the midst of difficulties. But of course, there's also lots of other methods that are helpful, like loving kindness and compassion, thought transformation, Tonglan. So there's many methods. But if any of you who are listening to this talk are experiencing any of these difficulties, then I recommend that you do contemplate these things and do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, to take care of your mind, keep your mind calm, peaceful, and happy for your own benefit, but also so you can be more beneficial to the people around you and to the world.
You mentioned that permanent things cannot come from impermanent things or be produced by. So could you explain how, like the emptiness of an impermanent object,
How the emptiness
of an impermanent object, how that sort of, I mean, it's dependent on the impermanent object. How is, how could that be interpreted? Like if a permanent object isn't produced by an impermanent object, how could the emptiness of an impermanent object depend on it? Because it's permanent. So in this case, a permanent object depends on an impermanent object.
So, for example, this book was produced in a company that makes books. And so it's impermanent. Okay, it came into existence from causes and conditions. And as soon as this book came into existence, its emptiness also came into existence. But the emptiness of the book didn't come into existence as a direct result of the causes and conditions that produced the book. It's more, I don't know how to explain it, but it's more something that it's the nature of the book. But it isn't something that came because of causes and conditions that came together, like the book. You had to get the paper and the ink and the machines and the people and all of those things working together to produce the book. But the emptiness didn't come into existence in the same way. It's just as soon as something arises, it's automatically empty of inherent existence. Emptiness of inherent existence is just the nature of everything, whatever exists. It is a difficult point, but I also find it helpful to think that permanent things like emptiness or uncompounded space are not physical things. That's, they're not material things composed of particles and so on. And I heard this from Geshe Dorje Namdo, was teaching a course on emptiness once. He says there's no substance there that can change, can arise from causes and conditions and change. It's just like an absence, it's something kind of abstract. So I found it helpful to think in that way as well. There's nothing there to change. Yeah. But yeah, I'm sure it's a subject of much debate and discussion in the Buddhist monasteries.